They cropped me out. That's how this story begins. I wasn't sick. I wasn't late. I wasn't even asked to stand aside. They just gathered everyone up, smiled for the camera, and let the photographer click. Without me, and when the frame went up in our family hallway, I saw the truth staring back at me. I didn't belong. Not to them. I remember standing in that hallway, barefoot on the cold hardwood, the smell of roast chicken still lingering from dinner. The photo was massive, professionally lit, all smiles, all symmetry. Mom in the center. Dad to her right. Julia in her designer dress. Mark with his arm slung round his new fiancée. And there was a space on actual physical gap between Julia and the vase stand. That's where I'd stood. I'd smiled too. My dress might not have been as expensive, but I had shown up, done my makeup, straightened my hair. I'd even worn the earrings Grandma left me. But in the final version, I was gone. I didn't cry, not at that moment. I just stared, and when I asked, quietly, why am I not in the photo? Dad said, it just looked better that way. Cleaner, like I was a smudge. It didn't start there, of course. These things never do. No, this was just the first time they didn't even bother hiding it. Growing up, Julia was the star, the dancer, the beauty. She won pageants, had a flair for performance, and got into Stanford with a letter of recommendation from her mentor/mom's college roommate. Mark, my brother, was the practical one. Soccer captain, fraternity legacy. Graduated with a degree in finance and a job already lined up with one of Dad's old friends on Wall Street. Me. I was the girl who wrote poems in her notebook and got told, maybe keep a backup plan. Sweetheart. The girl who once wanted to be a filmmaker and heard, you know that's not a real job, right? The girl who stayed home from the school trip because they said money was tight, only to find out 3 months later that Julia got a new car for her birthday. They never said it directly, but oh, they didn't have to. The tone, the silences. The way Mom looked at me when I said I was applying to a state college for media studies. Dad just muttered, don't expect us to co-sign anything stupid. And so I didn't. I worked double shifts at a bookstore while taking community college night classes. I watched Julia's Insta stories from her dorm at Stanford while eating leftover mac and cheese in a rented room with peeling paint. I swallowed envy like bitter medicine. At one point, I tried to show them what I was working on. A short film I had directed, written, edited all from my cracked laptop. It had been picked up by a small indie festival. Nothing huge, but I was proud. I remember the day I brought the flash drive home, heart hammering, waiting for them to crowd around. But instead, Mom sighed, glanced at the TV, and said, can't we just do this later? Julia peeked in, laughed lightly, and said, I'm meeting my agent in 10. And Mark. He was on a call. He always was. That night, I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of my old room decorated in lavender. Untouched since I was 15, and I realized something brutal. I could break myself in half trying to impress them, and it still wouldn't be enough. They had already written the story. I was a side character, maybe even a mistake. That's when I started planning the quiet escape. I moved to Austin 2 months later, packed my things into the back of a borrowed van and drove 18 hours with nothing but a hard drive full of ideas. A few $100, and a fury I didn't yet know was fuel. I didn't send a goodbye text. Did they notice I was gone? I don't know. They certainly didn't call. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I had started building something real. Between shifts, waiting tables, I was teaching myself business, watching hours of YouTube content on marketing, branding, scaling, listening to podcasts on entrepreneurship, tech disruption, and digital storytelling. I was soaking it in like oxygen. The film world didn't want me. Fine. I'd create my own. It started with a small digital platform for underrepresented creators. A space where filmmakers, writers, designers could connect, collaborate, pitch, and publish. I called it Frameshift. And yes, maybe I called it that because of what they did to me. Because they literally shifted me out of the frame. But now, I was stepping back in. Frame by frame. Scene by scene. Austin didn't care who my sister was. Austin didn't know that I had once cried in a bathroom stall while Julia gave her valedictorian speech. It didn't care that I hadn't been accepted into an Ivy, or that my dad said filmmaking was a nice hobby, just don't expect a paycheck. No, Austin only cared whether you showed up and kept showing up, and I did. I shared a 2-bedroom with 3 roommates, 2 of whom were in a perpetual state of heartbreak and 1 who sold essential oils and claimed they cured ambition. We didn't have a C that summer, just one box fan, we rotated like a sacred relic. I learned to write at night, when the air was cooler, and when the city finally stopped humming. Frameshift started small. No investors, no funding, just an idea and a WordPress template. I built the first version myself, clumsily, learning to code through trial, error, and tears. I taught myself UI/UX design through free online classes, borrowed library books, and the occasional Reddit thread. I posted about it constantly on forums, on subreddits, in film school Facebook groups. Most people ignored me. Some mocked me, a few sent in their work. The first collaboration was between a student in Ohio and a poet from New Delhi. A 5-minute short about insomnia and intergenerational grief. They uploaded it through Frameshift. It got picked up by a niche mental health blog. I cried when I saw it shared. Not because it was mine, but because I helped make it possible. That's when I understood something my family never taught me. Impact doesn't require permission. I kept going. When I wasn't working late shifts at the bar, I was pitching Frameshift to local entrepreneurs, chasing Wi-Fi at cafes, cold emailing creators, begging them to give my little site a try. Some said yes, most didn't, but every yes was gold. I made videos on TikTok talking directly to struggling creators. If you don't have access, build your own door, I'd say. If no one's calling you a filmmaker, act like one until they have no choice. It resonated. People were tired of gatekeeping, of needing a certain degree, or family money, or an uncle in the industry to get noticed. Frameshift became a space for the hungry, the unseen. The ones who had been told no too many times, and they came. A wave of them by the end of year one. We had 40,000 users. We hosted quarterly challenges and microgrants for projects voted on by the community. One film made through Frameshift won a student BAFTA. My inbox started to change. Would you be open to a partnership? Can we set up a meeting? Have you considered a seed round? I still didn't tell my family. I saw their lives unfold online. Julia married an architect who wore bow ties and spoke at TEDx events about creative minimalism. Mark joined a hedge fund and posted gym selfies with captions like "Grind doesn't sleep." Mom posted brunch photos. Dad was tagged at a golf resort in Arizona. No one noticed I was gone. Not really. Until one day, I got an email I never expected. Subject: Forbes Next 30 Under 30. Tech Innovation Nominee Confirmation. I stared at it, blinked, thought it was spam. It wasn't. They had seen the creator impact reports, the partnerships, the digital literacy scholarships we'd started offering through Frameshift. They wanted me. I didn't forward the email to anyone. I didn't post it. I just sat on the floor of my apartment, still not fancy, still drafty on, cried. Not tears of joy. Not exactly, more like exhaustion finally letting itself out, and then the photo shoot happened. They flew me to New York. Styled my hair in ways my mom would have never approved of. Gave me a navy blazer I would never afford on my own. The photographer said, "Turn your chin slightly." Click, and just like that, I was in the frame. Front and center. They printed it, plastered it on newsstands, wrote a 2-page profile on how Frameshift was disrupting traditional media pipelines and leveling access for underserved artists. My inbox exploded. Investors, journalists, even the mayor of Austin reposted it with fire emojis. And then, after all that time, after being erased from the walls of my own childhood home, I got a message from my sister. One line. Mom saw the magazine. She cried. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, satisfaction, emptiness. Maybe all of it. Because here's the thing, they never tell you. When you finally make it, the success doesn't erase the ache. It doesn't rewrite the years of silence, the moments where you begged for acknowledgement with your whole heart and got nothing but polite indifference. No magazine cover can give back a childhood, but it can give you something else. Proof that you were never the problem, that their dismissal was never about your worth but about their inability to recognize it. And suddenly, I wasn't the girl standing outside the family portrait anymore. I was the woman on the cover, looking directly into the lens, and not flinching. The thing about being recognized by the world before you're acknowledged by your own family is that it messes with your compass. You start to question, am I doing this to be seen by the world? Or am I still chasing the gaze of people who refused to look at me when I was just a girl with a cheap camera and a big dream? I didn't reply to Julia. I didn't call Mom. I didn't text Dad. I didn't post a heartfelt thank you or an I-told-you-so. I just sat with it, the message, the weight of it. The sudden, clumsy attempt at reconnection, because now that I was someone, they were peeking out of the shadows. Not running, no, not yet, but watching, testing the water to see if I'd reached back, but I didn't. Not immediately. Instead, I went home. Not home as in back into their arms. No, I went back to the house I grew up in. I hadn't been there in almost 5 years. Not since Julia's wedding. Not since I was seated 2 tables away from the dance floor, next to Great Aunt Martha, who had dementia and thought I was the caterer. I remember sitting there with my lukewarm chicken, watching Julia beam in her ivory gown, and wondering if anyone even noticed that I hadn't given a speech. That no one had asked me to. That I hadn't been in the bridal party. That I was there, but not really there. That trip home felt like walking through a wax museum of my own childhood. Familiar rooms preserved in time. The old family photos still on the wall, except none of them had changed. There were pictures of Julia at her medical school graduation, Mark holding his first bonus check in a gold frame, even a collage of our golden retriever in various Halloween costumes. But me. A single photo, tucked into the corner of a side table, slightly faded. I was 13, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, smiling, but not with my eyes. And suddenly I was back in that old, gut-familiar feeling, like I was a guest in a house I used to live in. Like my presence was tolerated, not celebrated. Then Mom came into the room. She didn't recognize my car in the driveway. Maybe she didn't expect me to ever come back. She froze when she saw me. Not in horror, more like surprise. Like I'd broken a rule. "You didn't call," she said softly. "No," I replied. I didn't think I had to, anymore. Silence, stretched, long and thick, like molasses poured across a linoleum floor. "I saw the magazine," she said, sitting on the edge of the sofa like she needed to steady herself. "I know. Your father." He couldn't believe it. I nodded. Not sure if that was meant to be an insult or a compliment. She reached for something on the table. Forbes, folded open. The page slightly bent where my face looked back up at me. "You looked very polished," she said, like it surprised her. "Success has a way of buying polish," I said flatly. Another silence. She finally asked, "Why didn't you tell us what you were building?" I laughed, not out of joy, but from the sheer absurdity of the question. "Because you never wanted to know. Because when I brought it up, you changed the subject. Because every time I tried to share anything that wasn't Julia's wedding or Mark's promotion, you looked at your phone. That's not fair." "No," I cut in. What wasn't fair was being told my dreams were embarrassing. That I should pick something practical like law or marketing. That I was too sensitive or too intense when I wanted more. "You made me feel like I was difficult just for existing." She didn't deny it. She just looked down at her hands, wrung them together like she wanted to squeeze time backwards. "I never knew you felt that way," she whispered. "That's because you never asked." The air in the room shifted. Something tight and unseen, unraveling. A rupture, but not yet. A repair. Then she said something I'll never forget. "We didn't know how to raise a daughter like you." And it landed with a dull, slow ache in my chest. They didn't know, so they didn't try. They didn't understand ambition without a diploma. Vision without approval. They were afraid of what they couldn't mold. So they left me outside the frame. And that's when I realized something. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't even malice. It was smallness. They had boxed themselves into a life of rules and appearances. Of Ivy League achievements and Sunday brunches. And anything that didn't fit didn't belong. I didn't belong. But now, the world had validated me. Forbes had done what they never could. Say, "She's worth paying attention to." And suddenly, their tone had changed. "Your father's company is interested in digital media now," she said, carefully. "They're thinking of investing in content platforms." I laughed. Out loud this time. "You think I want your money now?" She flushed. "That's not what I meant, but it is," I said. "You want proximity to what I've built. Not because you believe in it, but because it's safe now. Profitable. Palatable. You're angry. I'm clear. There's a difference." She blinked, like I was speaking a language she never bothered to learn. I stood up, walked over to the wall of photos, and looked at the space between Mark's graduation and Julia's wedding. There was just enough room for one more frame. I picked up the magazine, held it up. "I want you to hang this here," I said. "Not because you're proud. but because it makes you uncomfortable. Because maybe, just maybe, every time you pass it, you'll remember the daughter you refused to see. She said nothing, so I walked out. Not storming, not broken, just done. People I've never met have sent me emails that brought me to tears. A girl in Nebraska wrote, "I showed your cover story to my dad. He finally stopped asking me why I don't want to go to law school." A man in his 50s, recently laid off, wrote, "You reminded me it's not too late to start something." They didn't know my parents. They didn't know that I was the daughter who'd once been told, "You're too idealistic. Life will wear that out of you." But they saw me. They heard me, the strangest part. They believed in me more than the people who raised me ever did, and that realization was dizzying. Not because it hurt, though it did, deeply, but because it opened a space in me I didn't know I had. A space where I could let love in from unexpected places. The internet was never my goal. I didn't build my media company for fame. I built it because I was tired of watching stories like mine go untold. The daughter not chosen. The woman written off. The dreamer mocked. I built it for the people like me. And they showed up in droves. I remember the first time someone stopped me on the street. A young woman, maybe 22, tears in her eyes. "You're Natalie, right? I watched your TED Talk. You made me feel less crazy." She hugged me. A full trembling hug, and I thought, this is what validation feels like when it's clean. Not conditional. Not traded for obedience or silence. Just received. But you wouldn't believe what happened after that. My Uncle Mom's brother reached out. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. He left a voicemail that started with, "Hey kiddo, saw you on LinkedIn. Didn't know you were doing so well. Proud of you." That's the thing about success. It acts like a flare gun. People come out of the woodwork, claiming proximity like it's a badge. He wanted to grab coffee. Catch up. So did my cousin. So did Mark. Even Julia sent a message. "Let's talk soon. Would love to collaborate." Funny how worthless becomes visionary once you make it into a magazine. But here's the part they'll never understand. Success didn't erase the years of silence. It didn't make me forget the time I asked for help with rent and got ignored, or the Thanksgiving where they passed me over when going around the table to say what they were proud of. It didn't erase the night I cried myself to sleep after Julia told me, "You're just jealous because no one cares what you do." What it did do was carve me into someone sharp, unapologetic. It gave me the vocabulary to say, I don't need to be liked by the people who never made space for me. But it also made me gentler, more porous. Because now I saw how many others were walking around with invisible bruises from the hands of people they once called home. So, I started a podcast, The Unchosen Ones. Each episode, a raw conversation with someone who'd been overlooked by their family or community, and who made something brilliant out of that pain. And you know what? The very first episode was downloaded over 100,000 times in 2 days. People were starving for this. Not revenge. Not petty triumph. Recognition. That single quotes as what we all wanted at our core. Not praise. Not trophies. Just someone to say, "I see you. You matter. I'm sorry it took so long." But the people I wanted to hear those words from still hadn't said them. Instead, Dad sent a message through my brother. "Your father wants to know if you'd be open to doing a feature on his company. They're rebranding. You could help with the narrative." I stared at that text for 10 minutes. No, I'm sorry. No, I'm proud. Just you can help us look better now. That's when I knew. They still didn't get it. They didn't want to understand what they had done. They just wanted a piece of what I'd built. A name drop, a tag, a halo effect. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was above it, because once you know your value, truly know it, not from applause, not from clicks, but from the quiet center of your own integrity, no one can unmake it. I didn't reply. Instead, I donated $50,000 to a scholarship fund for first-gen entrepreneurs. Kids like me, who were told they were too much or not enough. Kids who dared to build without permission, and I signed the donation with one note: to the ones who never fit in the family photo, make your own frame. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony, watching the city blink below me. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely, because I was full of stories, of purpose, of something I had never received from my own family: belonging. It was just a photo. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over again, just a photo. But when you're the only one missing from the family picture that sits on your parents' mantle, neatly framed, perfectly posed, everyone smiling, stop believing that sentence means anything simple. That picture was taken 2 years after I moved to New York. I wasn't invited home for Christmas that year. No one said it outright, but I got the message loud and clear. You're too different, too distant, too much trouble. So they gathered without me, got dressed up, took that photo in front of the fireplace like everything was whole, and they printed it, framed it, showed it to neighbors. It made its way into family albums, even into the local church bulletin for some holiday feature. I found out from a cousin who innocently texted, "Wow, you must have been taking the photo." No, I wasn't there. I wasn't even considered. And, for years, that picture haunted me. Not because I wanted to be in it, but because I knew how easy it had been for them to crop me out of the narrative. And now that face they cut out is on a different kind of wall. Forbes did a feature on women changing the narrative. There were 5 of us. I stood center, arms crossed, wearing the same expression I used to wear at the dinner table when someone interrupted me mid-sentence. And there, on the cover, right beside the title, "The Ones You Underestimated." That cover hung in Forbes' main headquarters, blown up 6 feet tall. I didn't know that until I walked in for a podcast taping and saw it mounted in the lobby. Lit like a gallery piece. And suddenly, all I could think about was that old family photo. You know the irony? That week, my mom called me for the first time in years, no warning, no context, just her voice on the other end of the phone saying, "I saw your picture in a magazine. You look grown. Double quotes, grown. Not beautiful, not proud of you. Just grown." Like I was some plant she hadn't watered but noticed was still alive. I didn't know what to say. And then she added, "You've always been a little dramatic, Natalie. Maybe you needed to go through all that to become someone." I almost laughed. Go through all that. What she called drama, I called surviving without a safety net. I called building a life with no blueprint. I called learning to love myself when no one else did. But I didn't fight her. Not then. I just said, "Thanks for calling." And hung up, because here's the thing. When they exclude you, it's like being erased while still breathing. But when you make it, they try to revise the story. Pretend it was all part of some plan. As if you were the rebellious daughter in a coming Uvage movie they always knew would figure it out eventually. But I wasn't a character. I was the real thing. And they hadn't written me into their narrative. I had to write my own. And it turns out, my story was the one people wanted to hear. At my book launch party, I wrote a book. Out of frame, we used that Forbes cover as part of the centerpiece, projected it onto the walls of the event space. The room was packed. Colleagues, friends, former professors, my editor, clients, and in the middle of it all, a woman tapped me on the shoulder. She was maybe in her 60s, thin, tall, with soft, gray eyes. "I'm Julia's English teacher," she said. "From high school. I just wanted to tell you, I always knew you had a voice." She never liked that, but I did. And just like that, the air shifted. One small acknowledgement, one thread of validation from someone who'd seen me before the lights, before the headlines, before I even believed in myself. "I remember you," I said. She smiled. "Keep telling your story. It's waking people up." That night, I stayed late. Watched as the room emptied out. The projection of the magazine cover slowly faded as the tech team packed up. I took a moment. Alone, and I whispered. Like a prayer, or a quiet defiance, "This is my family photo now." No, it didn't have a fireplace. No siblings in matching sweaters. No forced smiles. But it had me whole, unedited, framed, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. It started with Mark. Not even a full week after the Forbes feature, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Mark Williams, my brother, the golden child. The reason I was always not quite. Mark, who once told me while laughing that I was the failed startup of the family. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Or maybe it was something deeper, some aching part of me still looking for a sign that things could be different. "Hey Nat," he said, too brightly, too rehearsed. "Saw the cover. Wild, huh?" There was no "I'm proud of you." No, I was wrong. Just wild. Then, barely a beat later, "So, listen. I'm helping Mom and Dad with this new project. Kinda, a family thing. We're putting together a nonprofit for underprivileged youth. Figured your story could, give it some heat." Heat. He meant publicity. Credibility, that clean glimmering glow success casts on anything it touches. "They've always admired your tenacity," he said, like that word had been plucked from a PR deck. "We thought maybe you could be on the board. Or do a post, maybe. Just help raise visibility." He didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask what the journey cost me. didn't apologize for the years he spent mocking me behind closed doors. He just wanted a share of the light. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, "Let me think about it," and hung up, my chest tight with a familiar ache. The next day, Julia emailed me, not a call, not a voice, just a perfect little message in my inbox titled, "Opportunity to Connect." She pasted a link to her wellness brand's new site and suggested, "I consider being a featured guest for Women's Empowerment Month." No acknowledgement of what she used to say. No mention of how she rolled her eyes at me at every dinner table, called me the martyr, told me my work was too intense. But now, I was palatable, marketable. Now, she wanted to leverage the very passion she once weaponized against me. I didn't reply, and then came my mother. She called again, this time using the softest voice I'd ever heard from her. "You're doing such good things, Natalie," she said. "And you've turned out beautifully. We're all just so impressed." Impressed. She said it like I was a contestant on a game show who exceeded expectations. Like my life had become a project she could finally admire from a safe distance. Then came the real ask. "You know your cousin Daniel is applying to Columbia, right? He'd love a recommendation. From someone like you, it would mean the world." Someone like me. I wanted to scream. Someone like me. You mean the one who slept in a basement and skipped meals to pay rent? The one you called too sensitive and too stubborn? But I didn't. I stayed quiet for a long beat, then said, "I don't think I'm the right person to help with that." Silence on the other end, then clipped. "Okay, if that's how you feel," as if I were the one being unreasonable. As if I were withholding out of spite, not survival. But this is what no one tells you about success. It doesn't just attract admirers, it attracts scavengers. People who once called you worthless suddenly want you to validate their worth. People who mocked your hustle now want you to co-sign their brands, and family. Family comes crawling back with a mix of selective amnesia and strategic kindness. But I remembered every time they made fun of my little ideas. Every time they showed up for Julia's dance recitals but never read a word of what I wrote. Every holiday dinner where I sat in silence because speaking up meant being shamed for being too passionate. I remembered my father's face when I told him I was going into journalism. He said, "You want to write for a living? Who's going to pay for that, Santa Claus?" They don't get to claim me now. Not unless they want to own all of it. The silence, the shame, the years they buried me under doubt. I didn't give them a piece of my magazine spread. I didn't tag them in my speeches. I didn't invite them to the award gala, where I stood in a red suit, holding a plaque that read, "Trailblazer of the Year." Instead, I invited my chosen family. Nico, who hired me when I had nothing but a laptop and a dream. Jasmine, who stayed up with me on deadline nights, feeding me granola bars and hope. Mrs. Hart, my old librarian, who once told me, "You don't need permission to be brilliant." They clapped like I was theirs. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Belonging is not a birthright. It's a boundary. You don't owe it to the people who dropped you when you were weight. You give it to the people who lifted you when you were wings. So I stopped answering calls that felt like chains. I started saying no, and for the first time in my life, no didn't feel like rejection. It felt like freedom. You want to know something funny? They didn't even find out I was speaking at the Women in Leadership Summit until the news segment aired on national TV. Not from me. Not from my mouth. Not from an invitation. Not from some kind of family group chat because, let's be honest, I was still conveniently left out of those no. They saw me because the world decided I was worth watching, and suddenly, I was no longer invisible. The segment opened with applause. My name in gold letters. A clip of me standing on stage in front of thousands, poised and calm. Telling a story that started in a drafty attic with a leaky ceiling and a girl no one believed in. I didn't cry. I didn't stammer. I stood tall, wearing the very red suit I used to dream about when I was broke and nameless. My voice steady. My words fierce. The kind of speech they replay on YouTube and quote on motivational Instagram reels. That night, the messages flooded in. From high school friends, who never invited me to their parties. From colleagues who once ignored my emails. And, of course, from family. Julia posted the clip on her story, with a caption that read, "So proud of my sister." As if she had been cheering for me this whole time. As if she didn't once laugh when I told her I couldn't afford new clothes for a job interview. As if she didn't roll her eyes every time I spoke about dreams larger than our living room walls. Mark sent a voice note that began with, "Okay, I'll admit it. That was pretty badass. Like my power was a surprise even now. But the one that twisted the deepest. Mom's voicemail. I watched your speech. Natalie, I didn't know you had that in you. That in me. Not, I'm sorry I never saw it before. Not, I wish I had supported you then. Just this dazed, startled concession, that maybe, just maybe, I'd been more than what she believed. But here's the thing, they weren't proud of me. They were proud of being associated with me. Proud to name drop me at dinner parties. Proud to pass my magazine around like it somehow reflected their values. But they hadn't earned that pride. They weren't there during the sleepless nights. They weren't there when I cried alone after my first TEDx application got rejected. They weren't there when my hands shook opening credit card bills I couldn't pay. But Nico was. And Jasmine. And Bree, my first intern, who told me she went back to school after watching my journey. Those people. They didn't need me to be shiny. They believed in me when I was a mess. That's the difference. Let me tell you about something that happened a week later. I was invited to a closed-door roundtable hosted by Forbes. 10 of us entrepreneurs, thinkers, artists were asked to share what kept us going when no one believed in us. I told the truth. I said, what kept me going wasn't belief. It was defiance. And people felt that. I saw it in their eyes. Later, a woman came up to me in the restroom. Her name was Alyssa. She was maybe late 50s, with tired eyes and a kind smile. She said, my daughter's just like you, ambitious, dreamy. I've been hard on her. I thought pushing her would make her strong. But listening to you, I realize I might have just made her small. That moment, it did more for me than any, I'm proud of you from people who let me bleed, in silence. Because my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers. It was her daughter's. It was yours. Maybe. You the one whose family only calls when they need something. You the one whose accomplishments go unnoticed while your siblings' bare minimum gets applause. You the one who wonders if maybe you're just asking for too much when you want to be seen. Let me tell you, you are not too much. They are simply too small to hold you. Don't wait for them to notice. Don't wait for them to clap. Build your own stage. Light it up, and when they finally come around, let them see what they missed. Don't hide your shine to make them feel better about closing their eyes. They chose not to see you. Let them sit in the dark. Because the ones who truly matter, they saw your light before it filled a room, and those are the people worth rising for. I didn't expect to be on the cover of Forbes. You might think I did because the world sees only the highlight reel, the TEDx talks, the glamorous red carpet photos, the carefully crafted captions. But when they emailed me, asking for a profile and a photo shoot for their self-made visionaries issue, I stared at my screen in silence. I remember whispering, is this real? Like I was still that girl folding thrifted blazers in the back of a stockroom. I didn't cry. Not then, but later that night, when I was alone, I stood in front of the mirror, stared into my own eyes, and I whispered, they're going to see me now. I meant my family, the ones who left me out of the family portrait because I didn't have a real career. The ones who said I was too dramatic, too independent, too much. Well, I was about to be too much for millions of readers, and there was nothing they could do to crop me out this time. The photo shoot was surreal. I wore a navy blue power suit with bold shoulders and heels that made me feel 10 feet tall. The stylist asked if I wanted a softer look, maybe something more approachable. No, I said. I've spent my whole life trying to look small, enough to be loved. Not anymore. The photographer grinned. Now that's the cover energy. Weeks later, the issue dropped. There I was. Bold headline. Full-page photo. My name across the top, in elegant serif font. Natalie Williams, from rejected to revolutionary. It sold out in 2 hours, the morning it came out. My phone practically caught fire. Messages from strangers, partners, journalists, people I admired for years. It was overwhelming. And then came the family group text. I hadn't muted it. Maybe a part of me never stopped hoping. Mark, you congrats sis, you're famous now. Julia, wow, the article made mom cry. We're proud of you. Mom, I bought 10 copies. Already, framed one for the living room. People need to know you're my daughter. My daughter. You want to know what I felt? Not joy, not pride. I felt a quiet, simmering grief, because when I was sleeping in a studio apartment with no heat, I wasn't her daughter. When I begged her to believe in me, to just show up, she didn't know me. Now that the world approved of me, suddenly I was hers again. No, you don't get to lay claim to someone you buried in silence. Still, I replied, because I'm not bitter. I'm not cruel, but I am clear. I said, thank you. I'm proud of what I've built, but I built it without you. Mom read it. So did Mark and Julia. None of them replied. Silence, and that silence, it spoke louder than their sudden pride ever could. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just trying to earn love anymore. I had moved on. I was no longer orbiting their approval like a moon, desperate for light. I was my own sun now. You know what happened next? My publicist called and asked if I wanted to do a cover story interview TV. Prime time. I said yes, and this time, when they asked about my upbringing, I didn't lie. I didn't dress it up in palatable lines or pretend my family was supportive. I said, I come from a family where success wasn't nurtured, it was resented. I had to become my own parent, my own mentor, my own believer. I watched that clip go viral. Thousands of comments, people saying, she's speaking for all of us. She's telling the truth I've never dared say. And I meant it. Because your story might have started in neglect, but that doesn't mean it has to end in longing. You don't owe anyone silence to protect their comfort. Especially not the ones who watched you drown and asked why you didn't smile more. So here I am on the cover, on the stage, on the screen. Not because they let me, but because I stopped asking. You reading this if you're still waiting for them to notice. Stop waiting, build your spotlight. And when they finally look up and see you blazing, let them. But never forget who lit that fire. Thanksgiving used to be the holiday that hurt the most. Not because I didn't love pumpkin pie, or roasted vegetables, or even the forced small talk about weather and real estate. No. It was because every year, there'd be a long table, a family table, and somehow, my chair always felt colder than the others. Somehow, my plate was always filled, but I never felt fed. I remember one year, I offered to bring dessert homemade, from scratch. I spent hours baking an almond tart, a family recipe, from Grandma's old notebook. When I walked in, Julia was already passing around store-bought cupcakes, and no one even unwrapped my tart. Oh, Mom said, I forgot to set a spot for you. Just squeeze in next to the fridge. That was the moment I stopped trying to be invited. This year, things were different. Because this time, the invitation wasn't just for dinner. It was for honor. Mark texted me 2 weeks ahead. We're hosting at Mom's. Everyone wants you there. Mom's even making your favorite. You'll sit at the head next to her. I read the message twice, then once more, for disbelief. Julia followed up with, the cousins are dying to meet you. Can you sign their magazines? And there it was again, quiet, humming self-interest, the magnetic pull of my public image. I stared at the message, heart still. I thought about showing up. I thought about dressing elegantly, arriving late, and saying all the right things while soaking in their stunned faces. But then I imagined that same table, the one where my voice used to be interrupted, the one where I was always the afterthought, the one where I was praised only when strangers had already clapped for me, and suddenly, I didn't want to go, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. I didn't need that seat anymore, so I replied, simply, thanks for the invite, but I've made other plans this year. No explanation, no guilt. Just a woman protecting the peace she bled to earn. Instead of sitting at that table, I spent the holiday at a small cabin upstate with Nico, Bree, and 2 other friends who'd become like chosen family. We cooked together. We toasted to survival. We took turns sharing what we were grateful for. When it was my turn, I said, I'm thankful that my worth is no longer up for debate. The room went quiet not because it was heavy, but because it was true. And then they clapped, not performatively. Not because I was on the cover of anything, but because they saw me. That's the thing. You spend so long begging for a chair at someone else's table, you forget you can build your own. You can cook your own feast. Fill the room with people who don't ask you to shrink, who don't need you to earn love like it's a paycheck. You're allowed to outgrow. The places that taught you starvation was normal. You're allowed to say no even, when they finally say yes. Because if their acceptance only came after applause, then it was never love, it was performance, and you deserve something real. So I didn't go back. I didn't sit in that old chair or listen to half-hearted toasts or answer the question, so what do you actually do? Instead, I lit a fire, passed a bottle around, watched the snowfall, and, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a missing piece at someone else's party. I felt whole. It started as a catch-up coffee. Mark reached out again, this time more politely. Almost rehearsed. Hey, I know we haven't talked in a while. I was wondering if we could meet. Just the two of us. I've been thinking a lot. Ignored it, but something in me curiosity, maybe closure, agreed. We met at a trendy cafe downtown. The kind with minimalist lighting, exposed brick, and overpriced cold brew. He looked tired, not worn down, tired. But the kind of tired that comes from seeing someone you once pitied rise into someone you now envy. I read the Forbes piece again, he said. Didn't realize how hard you had it. I guess I wasn't really paying attention back then. I stayed quiet. Because back then, I'd cried into my pillow while he played video games and told me to stop being sensitive. Because back then, he watched our mother humiliate me in front of guests and laughed along. But now, he didn't realize. I just think, he continued, maybe we could find ways to work together. I know you're building that mentorship fund. Maybe we could tie it in with my media group. You'd get exposure. I'd get investors. And there it was. The real reason, not healing, not RECONNECTION, leverage. I sipped my drink slowly. Mark, I said, do you remember the last time you called me your sister before I got famous? He blinked. Come on, don't make it like that. I'm not making anything, Mark. I'm remembering. I lived it. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, but not remorseful. You're letting your pride get in the way of a great opportunity, he said. I smiled, not kindly. No, I'm letting clarity get in the way of manipulation. I stood up, slid my untouched croissant toward him. You can eat this, but you don't get to eat off my name. He didn't follow me out. Because deep down, he knew. He'd lost access not just to my time, but to the version of me that begged to be seen. Later that week, Julia emailed me long-winded, punctuated, with faux warmth and bullet points about how we could revamp the family image. By launching a charity gala together, she even included branding ideas. Williams United, a legacy of resilience. I stared at the name, United. You mean the same people who turned their backs when I needed help with rent? The same ones who told extended family I was off chasing some blog thing while I worked 20-hour days to keep my startup alive? This was not unity, this was rebranding. And I wasn't interested in being part of their redemption arc. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Bree, my coup and best friend. Her reply, a single line. Blood might be thicker than water, but not thicker than boundaries. God, I love her. It's wild how the people who hurt you the most will try to re-enter your life under the banner of family. As if biology grants eternal access. But here's what I've learned. Blood doesn't give people the right to use you. Forgiveness doesn't mean partnership. And family. It's not defined by who you're born to. It's defined by who shows up when you have nothing to give. I love in my life now. Chosen love. Chosen loyalty. People who knew me before the magazine covers. Before the awards. Before the speeches. People who saw me not as leverage but as me. I won't trade that for a table full of false smiles and thinly veiled ambition. You shouldn't either, so if they only call you when they see your shine, let them watch. But from a distance, behind the velvet rope of your hard-earned peace, there was a photo on the hallway wall in my mother's house. One I'll never forget. It was taken at Mark's college graduation. Everyone dressed to impress, arms slung over shoulders, cheeks pressed close. I'd been there that dice in the back, holding the camera, but when the photo was printed, my face was cropped out. Oops, Mom had said. There wasn't room. I remember how my stomach dropped, how I stared at the frame and realized I wasn't missing because of a mistake. I was missing because I wasn't meant to be remembered. They made room for their pride, not for me, so when Forbes asked to feature me for their 30 Women Who Changed the Game issue, and the photo team reached out with concepts, I said, I want to be centered, fully, clearly, no distractions. They laughed politely, assuming I meant a flattering angle. But it was more than that. I wanted presence. I wanted to be uncroppable. The shoot was scheduled in an old theater, velvet drapes, grand stage, antique lighting. I wore an emerald suit, tailored sharp at the shoulders, with gold cufflinks engraved with my initials. I stood in the spotlight, not behind it, not holding it, but in it. When the issue dropped, the headline read, "She was the family's forgotten one. Now she's defining an industry." And there I was, on every airport newsstand, every digital billboard in Soho, every LinkedIn feed, flooded with reshares and applause. My inbox exploded. Former classmates, ex-boyfriends, old bosses, even distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Wow, one message said, didn't see that coming. Another, We always knew you were special. Lies. But I didn't care. Because the only person who needed to know I was special was me. Still, there was one message that stuck. From Mom. Subject. Proud body. I saw the magazine. You look beautiful. Maybe you can stop being angry now. I was just doing my best. We all make mistakes. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just deflection dressed as motherhood. I didn't respond, not because I didn't feel something. I did, but because I no longer believed that a title like Mom exempted someone from accountability. I let the silence do the speaking, because when words have failed you long enough, silence becomes your fluency. A week later, Julia posted a photo of the Forbes cover to her Instagram story with the caption, "That's my sister." #Bosledi, #INSPO, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because there was once a time when being her sister felt like a wound. Now, it was her accessory. People will rewrite history to align with your success. They'll pretend they never erased you. They'll crop themselves back in, but here's the thing. You were never invisible. They just refused to see you. And when you stop waiting for their gaze to define your glow, that's when you really shine. Let them watch now. Let them repost. Let them scramble to connect to what they once dismissed, but never, ever hand them the pen again. Your story is yours now. And this time, you're not just in the frame, you are the frame. It was a gala, one of those luxury charity nights where people pretend to care more than they do. I'd been invited as a keynote speaker, asked to share my journey as a woman in tech who built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing. As I stepped out of the black car, cameras flashed, people murmured, and publicists whispered my name like it was newly sacred. Inside, under the chandeliers and champagne flutes, I spotted a familiar silhouette. Julia, hair-coiffed, dress designer, expression rehearsed. She was talking to a man I recognized from television, a venture capitalist known for throwing money at startups and smiling wide when cameras were on. I didn't approach, but then, halfway through the cocktail hour, did Vanessa say she sang, like we were old friends? There were people around. People she wanted to impress. Can I introduce you to someone? He's launching a new fund and was just saying how he's desperate to meet more female founders. I told him, well, my sister practically wrote the playbook. I looked at her. The woman who once told me I didn't have the grit for business. The one who left me off the guest list for her engagement party because it was intimate. Now, here she was, parading me. I smiled, but not for her, for me. I appreciate it, I said, but I'm not looking for funding right now. And if I was, I'd reach out to my network directly. She blinked, just once. Then the panic flickered. Oh, of course. Totally get it. Just thought it'd be cool for him to meet you. You're kind of a big deal now. Now. Not always. Now later. That night, I delivered my speech. I didn't mention my family by name, but they were everywhere between the lines. In every syllable that described being dismissed, in every story about sleepless nights and breaking through ceilings no one wanted to admit still existed. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand. Among them, my father's old boss. The same man who once offered Mark an internship and ignored my application. He waited until the crowd thinned, then stepped up, holding a glass of something aged and expensive. I have to say, he murmured, I never expected this, but it's impressive. Really is. I nodded. Said nothing. He chuckled. You've become the one everyone wants to know. I tilted my head. Is that so? He leaned in slightly. If you ever want to advise on our innovation committee, we'd love to have your name attached. Think about it. I smiled, slow and razor sharp. You know, I remember sending a proposal to your office once. Years ago. It came back unopened. He cleared his throat. Well, things change. They do, I agreed. People don't. I walked away. Because when the tables turn, you don't need to gloat. Just sit down and eat. There's a strange silence that follows success. It's not peace, not at first. It's disorientation. When you've spent so long being underestimated, believed small, told to be realistic, the spotlight doesn't feel warm. It feels blinding. You question who you are without the struggle. But then, slowly, you realize you're not the struggle. You're the survivor. You're not the rejected one. You're the risen one. You're not the shadow they cast. You're the sun they can't block anymore. So when they come knocking for favors, for handshakes, for introductions, you don't have to slam the door. Just don't open it all the way. Let them feel what distance tastes like, Because that's the cost of erasing someone they remember, and eventually, they become unforgettable. It started with a phone call from Mom. Not a text. Not a forwarded link. A real phone call. That alone was enough to make me pause. Her voice was unusually soft, almost careful. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I was wondering if we could talk properly, maybe lunch. Just us." I hesitated. We hadn't had a meal alone since, maybe ever, but something in her tone, something uncertain and small, kept me from saying no. We met at a quiet cafe in the suburbs. Not her usual choice, not mine either, which meant it was neutral ground. A ceasefire zone. She arrived first. No makeup, her hands nervously smoothing down the tablecloth. When I sat down, she looked at me like I was a stranger she'd once known in another life. "I read the article," she said eventually. "All of it." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't just look at the pictures." She smiled weakly. I deserved that. Silence stretched between us like old laundry on a linering, everything unspoken. Then, to my surprise, she said, "I think I never really knew you." I thought I did. But I only knew the version of you I was comfortable with. The quiet one. The helper. The one who didn't ask for too much. Her voice trembled. "I didn't want to believe that you could be more than what I pictured, because, if you were, then maybe I had been wrong." I let her speak. Let her sit in the discomfort she'd handed me so freely for years. She continued. "You weren't the problem. I was just too afraid of what your success would say about me. About my parenting. About the choices I made with the others." I breathed slowly, watching the truth finally find its way to the surface. "I'm proud of you, Vanessa," she said, her eyes glossy. "Not because you're on magazine covers. Not because of the money. But because you became someone I never dared to be. It should have felt satisfying. But instead, it felt sad, because what she said next cracked something open. I see now that you never needed to prove yourself to us. We were just too blind to see who you already were." I nodded. "I know," I said quietly. "But I did need to prove it to me." Her face softened. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there. Two women finally seeing each other as they were, not as they were supposed to be. After that day, the energy shifted. I became the relative they bragged about at weddings. The one they whispered about in pride. Not pity. Mark sent a LinkedIn request with a message. "Would love to catch up, sometime, maybe collaborate." Julia posted a throwback photo of the two of us as kids, captioned, "Look how far we've come." They didn't realize I saw through it. They didn't understand that being family didn't mean I owed them access to every version of my life now. Yes, I forgave, but no, I didn't forget. Forgiveness is freedom for you, not for them. And freedom meant I could love them, without letting them near the core of me again. Because sometimes the people who raised you only remember the mold they tried to force you into, not the sculpture you became when you shattered it. They want credit for a masterpiece they never bothered to understand. But I was done needing their applause. At another gala, this one for a women's mentorship initiative I funded, I stood next to a girl named Tella, 19, first-generation college student, glowing with raw ambition. She grabbed my hand just before I walked on stage. "You're why I didn't quit," she whispered. "I saw your story, and I thought maybe I can write mine, too." I felt something bigger than validation in that moment. I felt legacy, because it's one thing to rise. It's another to lift while you do. That's when I realized I didn't win to show them. I won to show her, to show you. That worth doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself over and over, until the world catches up. I used to think healing would look like reconciliation. That one day, my family would sit around a table, admit they were wrong, and everything broken would somehow snap back into place. But healing didn't come with grand apologies or cinematic reunions. It came in quiet mornings. It came in the way I stopped flinching when someone brought up the past. It came when I no longer waited for their praise to feel proud of myself. There was a time years ago when I would stare at photos of us together, before everything cracked, wondering what went wrong. Was it me? Was I too much? Too ambitious? Too invisible? But now, I barely remembered what those photos felt like, because they were never whole to begin with. They had cut me out long before they physically did. When they made decisions without me, when they praised Mark's grades and ignored mine, when they celebrated Julia's wedding and made excuses about my different path. That path, it wasn't different, it was mine. And it led somewhere. Brilliant. Not because it was lit by their approval, but because I lit the damn thing myself. step by painful step. One evening, I was invited to deliver a guest lecture at Cambridge, a full auditorium, rows of sharp young minds, eager and defiant. I spoke about resilience not as a buzzword, but as survival. I talked about what it means to come from a family who claps louder for your siblings, who sees you only through the lens of what they expected. I told them, they don't have to believe in you. You just have to believe in you, long enough to make them question everything. A standing ovation followed. But what stayed with me most was the girl who waited until everyone else had left. She had tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands. My mom told me I was selfish for not going into nursing like she did. She said, but I want to make video games. Real ones. I thought maybe that was stupid. I smiled, my voice steady. Tell me, does making people feel seen and heard in a world that's constantly ignoring them sound stupid to you? She shook her head. Then don't let small minds define the size of your dream, because that's the thing they don't tell you. The freedom you're chasing doesn't come from proving them wrong, it comes from realizing you never needed their permission to begin with. The Forbes cover came out on a Tuesday. The image, me polished and unapologetic. The headline, she built an empire they told her would fail. I didn't post it right away. I took a walk. No phone, no press release, just the wind, the hum of the city I'd made my own. And I thought of all the people watching now. Not the ones who doubted me, but the ones still doubting themselves. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've been told you're too emotional, too naive, too loud, too much, or worse, not enough. Maybe you've been erased from the family group chat, the invitations, the conversations that matter. Maybe your absence at the dinner table isn't even noticed anymore. But hear me when I say this, you are not invisible. You are not small. You are not a phase or a mistake or a disappointment. You are becoming. And one day sooner than you think, someone will scroll past your face on a billboard, a book cover, a news article, and say, wait, isn't that the one we used to ignore? And they'll look again. But this time, they won't look through you. They'll see you. I stood in front of the newsstand for a long time. Longer than I probably should. There it was, misstaring back in glossy print, framed by headlines I once believed were reserved for other people. The ones born into belief, into approval, into easy applause. But now, the world saw me. The same girl they once cut out of a family photo now smiled from the cover of Forbes. How poetic. I didn't feel vindictive. Not anymore. I felt grounded. Solid in a way that didn't need revenge, or even recognition. Just truth, lived, earned, and worn like armor. A group of teenagers walked by the stand, pausing. Hey, isn't that the founder of Rhinestone? One of them asked. Yeah, she started with nothing. Total self-made. She's a beast. A beast. That used to sting. Now it felt like a crown. My phone buzzed. It was Julia. Again, another message, this one saying, I showed Mom the cover. She cried, said she always knew you'd be great. Thought you should know. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. They could talk among themselves. They could rewrite history if they wanted, say they always supported me. That I just didn't see it. Let them have their version, I have mine, and mine is built on sleepless nights, overdraft fees, whispered prayers, brutal rejection, and the quiet resilience of believing in myself when nobody else did. You don't need to be written back into their story. Write your own. In the months that followed, I turned down TV offers, book deals, even a potential reality show. Seriously, who needs a camera in their living room? I focused on building legacy, not hype. We launched a mentorship fund for young women from underrepresented backgrounds. We expanded our internship program to include formerly incarcerated women re-entering the workforce. I spoke at recovery centers, shelters, community colleges, not to show off, but to show up, to say, you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not unworthy because they didn't choose you. Because I remember what it felt like to sit in the back row, invisible. To swallow your dreams whole, just to keep the peace. To be the helper, the quiet one, the one who didn't make waves. But I also remember the first moment I realized I didn't have to stay there. You don't, either. Some stories end with reconciliation, some with revenge. Mine, it ends with freedom. I no longer measure my worth by how close I am to their table, because I built my own table. And there's always a seat for the ones who've been told they don't belong. So if you've been erased, rejected, or overlooked, good. Let them underestimate you. Let them cut you out. Let them laugh, because one day, When your face is shining from the pages of something bigger than they could imagine, they'll have no choice but to remember, you were the one they couldn't break. You were the one who rose anyway. And when they finally look at you with something between awe and regret, smile gently, but don't look back.